everyone. Welcome to the Dream Catcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. At some point in our life, we all go through difficult times. We experience pain, disappointment, and loss. And these experiences can often have a profound impact on us, for better or for worse. But according to my guest today, Stephen Cope, crisis does not have to derail us. In fact, it can be the very thing that can direct us to our purpose and help us step forward as our best selves. This is a central theme of his new book, Dharma in Difficult Times. Stephen Cope is a psychotherapist, Kripalu Yoga teacher, scholar, and best-selling author of several books on yoga and meditation. He is the founder of the Kripalu Institute of Extraordinary Living in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the largest center for the study and practice of yoga in the Western world. The magazine Yoga Journal named him one of the most influential thinkers, writers, and teachers on the current American yoga scene. In this episode, Stephen will offer his insight into how we can identify our purpose as we find our way through our darker times. He'll explain what it means to find our Dharma using examples from his own life and the lives and teachings of famous figures from history. And if you like what you heard, please don't forget to like, rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks. Hello, Stephen. How are you today?
Hi, Celine. I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing terrific. I am so glad that we have this opportunity to connect today to talk about your new book, Dharma in Difficult Times.
Yeah, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. And I just finished reading the book, and it is such a compelling read, and it conveys such a powerful message that I think is really important and relevant to our times today. So I just want to say that from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you. The book's just out for a couple of weeks, so I'm kind of in that early phases of how is this landing? So thank you. That really means a lot to me.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And we'll get into the details about the book later. But for now, let's talk about your personal journey. Tell us about the events and occurrences that led to you discovering your own Dharma.
Yeah, it's a great question. So just for your viewers, in case they're not familiar with the word Dharma, Dharma is a Sanskrit word that it's one of those complex Sanskrit words that has a lot of kind of overlapping meanings. So very often in Buddhist circles or in yogic circles, you'll hear it meaning law, truth, path. But in the Bhagavad Gita, the scripture that I'm writing about, it always means sacred calling, true calling, or true vocation, or vocation of the soul. So that's what Dharma is in the context of the conversation you and I are going to have. And as far as discovering my own Dharma, you know, I think, Celine, by and large, most people of my age, when we look back at our lives and look at the trajectory of our Dharmas, notice that it's the discovery of our Dharma is very incremental. It's very step by step. So I saw that you were going to ask me that question, and I pondered it a little bit. And I thought, wow, this whole journey for me started back in graduate school when I just happened upon this meditation center that was near my home. And every evening as I was coming back from graduate school, I would notice there was a group of 30 or 40 people just sitting, clearly meditating in front of this big glass window at this house that I would walk past. And I'd never meditated. So I walked in one evening and I said, what are you guys doing? And can I join? So he said, yeah, sit down. He gave me a little instruction. And I was 30 years old at that point and had been trained in psychoanalytic psychology and all kinds of things, but had never meditated. And I found myself so instantly drawn to the Dharma. And now in the word, the Dharma, I'm using the path and the teachings. as soon as I was exposed to the genius of Buddhism and yoga and the Eastern contemplative traditions, I just felt completely lit up. So that was the first step. And at that point, I was a psychotherapist with a thriving practice in Boston. And then a situation came along where I was able to take a year-long sabbatical. So I thought, I'm going to go to this brilliant meditation center called Kripalu, the largest meditation yoga center in America. So I took my sabbatical there. And then while I was there, I realized that I wanted to start writing about the relationship between the Eastern contemplative traditions and Western psychology. So as I look back, there were just these steps and a lot of doors that were opening, doors that, and the process of coming to grips with and recognizing your Dharma it's a little bit of a mystical path. You encounter open doors, as I did, like when I put out the proposal for my first book. I got this brilliant editor at Bantam Books. And so at every step along the way, I made little sequential steps that led to my really fully embracing my Dharma finally as a writer. And the book that we're talking about is my sixth book. And I would say if I have to characterize my Dharma, it's writing about the genius of the Eastern contemplative traditions and their relationship to the Western mind and Western psychology. And in my first book on Dharma, which is called The Great Work of Your Life, I wrote about 11 different great figures. And I noticed when I was done with the book that each one of them had this very gentle, subtle, incremental trajectory toward the full embrace of their Dharma in this lifetime. And that's certainly what happened to me.
Wow, that's a great story. And I want to ask you, Stephen, you mentioned that several doors opened for you along the way and you kind of had to step into it. How did you know that they were significant and that you had to take action?
That's such a great point. You know, here's what happens, Celine, is that you begin to learn to recognize them. So the very first point on that trajectory that I gave you was actually quite I would say, a dramatic recognition. I was sitting in meditation in my home. This was after I'd learned to meditate one afternoon, and I really got the classic kind of voice from inside that said, "Steve, you have to take a year off. You have to take a year off." And I listened to it. It was dramatic, and not only do you have to take a year off, but you have to go and practice meditation in depth at some kind of monastic place. And at the time I was in psychoanalysis as part of my training. So I checked that out with my analyst, with all my friends, with my family. It took me 2 years to respond to that knowing, if you will, that recognition, because I had to leave a very complicated life in which I had many psychotherapy patients, long-term patients. Took a while to terminate with them. And then finally, 2 years later, I was able to leave Boston, go to Kripalu, where I've spent the last 32 years. So that was a big one. But in answer to your question, you begin to, and meditation and contemplative practice, it all allows you to hone your sense of discernment. So your sense of being able to recognize messages that are from deep inside, messages that, as I say in the book, are from kind of awake mind or illumined mind, or that sense of awakeness that we have lying underneath the ordinary craziness of discursive mind. You learn to recognize it and pay attention to it. And partly it's through the act of, you said something smart. You said, how did you realize you had to act on it? Well, acting on it is essential, right? When you get these messages, the more you act on it, the more support you get from the universe, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as you may think, oh my God, am I going to jump off this cliff? Am
Yeah.
I going to leave my therapy practice? And then in retrospect, you realize it wasn't a cliff at all. It was just like a little curb.
Yeah.
But the
And you couldn't
more
see what's ahead, right?
you couldn't see what's ahead.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, the more practice you have at doing those little steps, the more you get to the big cumulative kind of fruitful fruition of Dharma. It's a great
Yeah.
question. But saying acting on them is so important. This is where I love Henry David Thoreau, whom I profile in my new book,
Yes.
because he was all about action, and he was about discerning that still small voice within and then acting on it. Yeah.
What you say in your book that we often find our dharma during difficult times, and I just wanted to move into that topic. Is it always the case that we find our dharma during difficult times, or can it just be a stroke of like an intuitive feeling that you get, as we just
It can
talked about?
definitely be. It can definitely be the latter, Celine. So
Yeah.
I like to say there are three different, very fruitful hunting grounds for Dharma. The first one, which doesn't require difficult times, is the answer to the question, what's lighting you up? Okay, so what is it that's lighting up your soul? And I very often have my students just make a list of what it is that's lighting them up. And on that list will be a bunch of mundane things, but there'll be several really important things that are and this is the best way I found to say it, that are lighting them up. So that doesn't require difficult times. It does require discernment. The second very fruitful hunting ground for Dharma that I found is what I call duty. So the question there is, what is the duty that you feel deeply inside that if you do not accomplish it or attempt to accomplish it in your lifetime, you'll feel a profound sense of self-betrayal. So,
and and one of your characters really exhibited that feeling
that's
that he
right.
had. I don't remember who it was.
It was Charles Russell Lowell.
That is right. Yeah.
Lowell.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, so then duty becomes reframed from something that gets imposed on us from without to some deeply felt, ardent longing to, to engage in some endeavor. So the first happy hunting ground, as it were, is really what's lighting you up. And then duty is different than that. And duty may have more rough edges. And then the third one is what difficulties are arising in your life, because very often difficulties have at their core these amazing opportunities and possibilities, as they did with this particular character that you're talking about. So difficulties force us sometimes to recognize the Dharma that's there that we've not been aware of. So difficult times force us to step up, and they force us to gather together everything we have inside in order to meet the difficulty. In yoga, this is called unified action. The doctrine of unified action is one of the central doctrines of the Bhagavad Gita. And that's the idea that we unify everything we have, all of our actions, around our calling, around our sacred duty. And of course, this is what Charles Russell Lowell did in the book. I also wrote about Harriet Beecher Stowe in this book, who, Harriet Beecher Stowe had long had a sense that she wanted to be a writer. And of course, she was the daughter of a clergyman and the wife of a clergyman, and she didn't have an opportunity. But it was when her 2-year-old son, Charlie, died that her life changed, and she felt this, in the midst of the difficulty of the death, she felt this connection with other people, in this case specifically enslaved Black women who were losing their children, their infants, not necessarily through death, but on the auction block. She felt this welling up of a calling to write about this. And she wrote her brilliant book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then a sequence of books after that, which are very powerful. But that may never have happened had she not been forced by difficult times to call forth that gift. So you see what I mean about unified action? She brought it all together.
She brought it all together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I just want to say that I enjoyed reading the stories of all these luminaries that you featured in the book, because I didn't know many of them. I did know Henry David Thoreau, I knew Gandhi, but the others not so much. I guess it's because I don't know too much about American history, but it was fascinating to read. And I'm just curious, Stephen, what made you choose these characters specifically to carry the message of your book? Why did they stand out to you?
Well, I always use characters that I have some deep relationship with in my life. So, and in each chapter, I try to give at least a little window into what that personal connection is for me.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I wanted to, I begin the book by talking about what psychologists now call the disorienting dilemma. So a disorienting dilemma is a dilemma that we face in life that cannot be solved by us without reimagining our whole understanding of the world and how the world works. They're dilemmas of such gravity that they force us to move to a higher state of consciousness, if you will. So I wanted to track disorienting dilemmas all the way from 1830 with Henry David Thoreau in Concord, Massachusetts, to the present time with Ruby Sales. But I wanted each one of these characters to be facing a dilemma that had to do with America's most important dilemma, which is the dilemma that our Constitution says that all men are created equal, and yet slavery was allowed within the context of that Constitution and all the early documents to talk about freedom. So this is what I call a dilemma etched in rock. This is a dilemma that the United States has had to deal with. And I wanted to trace the way in which the Bhagavad Gita has influenced our thinking about this dilemma, all the way from Thoreau to Ruby Sales, who's still alive and very active in civil rights right now. So each character is actually dealing with a different facet of the dilemma of racism, xenophobia, slavery, and so forth. So that's why I picked these particular characters.
And you opened the book with Gandhi. What made you choose Gandhi?
So Gandhi is, as we know, the most important student of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. Gandhi said, if you want to see what a life looks like that's ordered around the teachings of the Gita, look at my life. And Gandhi is the single thread that goes through all of these lives.
I noticed that. Yeah.
Precisely.
And his teachings on nonviolence too. I noticed that was also a connecting thread in all these stories.
Right. So Gandhi is what finally connects Thoreau all the way up to Martin Luther King Jr. and Ruby Sales and Jonathan Daniels, who was martyred during the civil rights movement in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also Gandhi had refined his understanding of and acting out of the Gita's principles more than anybody that I know of, that I'm aware of in pretty much in human life. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started with him, because then he becomes the rock or the pillar that the whole rest of the book is based on. And at the end, as you noticed, we revisited Gandhi and the Great
several
March.
Times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just amazing to read. And I love the fact that you weaved in your own personal stories and the stories of your friends throughout the book. I think that was great, because it gave it some insight into your life and how you related to these characters and the lessons that they stood for.
And every one of them does have some kind of really personal connection. Like Charles Russell Lowell, it turns out that one of my best friends is his great nephew, right? And So I don't know, that filled me with, and his cousin, Carol Bundy, wrote the brilliant book on Charles Russell Lowell. So when I read that book, I knew I had to include him in one of my books on Dharma.
Right, right. And Stephen, I wanted to talk to you about something that you wrote in the book. You wrote that certain kinds of changes bring confusion, suffering, and resistance, but it also brings new possibilities, new ways of seeing the world, and new solutions to all problems. So my question is, most of us, a lot of us, can understand this on an intellectual level.
Right.
But how can we remember this and find comfort in it when we're in the midst of pain, when we're suffering?
It's very difficult. I mean, for the most part, we blip in and out of that kind of perspective. But I'll just tell you, for me, this is very personal now. For me, the second to the last chapter is about Marian Anderson, the great contralto. And
yes,
as the epigraph to that chapter, I use a shloka from the Tao Te Ching, which says, "The master sees things as they are without trying to change them. She lets things go their own way and resides at the center of the circle." So this is a brilliant verse from the Tao Te Ching, which basically means if you can find the center of your circle, which for some people is God, for me, it's my deep and abiding 40-year-long meditation practice. If you can find that place to sit where you feel grounded and connected with what really matters, with your own intuition, your own discernment, you can maintain some of that perspective through the difficult times. So I have a long, like I said, 40 years of meditation, and it's the one thing that I try never to miss in my week. It's both meditation and yoga, but I do about an hour and a half of sitting meditation 3 times a week with a group or with one of my Dharma buddies, one of my accountability partners in meditation. And no matter how scattered my mind gets, coming back again and again to that safe spot, to my cushion, to my meditation practice, brings me back to the kind of perspective that we need in order to survive difficult times, to survive what we've all been through in the last 3 years. And, you know, what meditation brings us to, and I write about this in depth in the Marian Anderson chapter, is that part of the mind that we call witness consciousness, the deep part of the mind, that usually we live in what's called ordinary discursive mind, which is the surface of the mind, which is restless and crazy. But we're programmed to also connect with this deeper part of the mind that is, if you will, like the depth of the ocean, where it's still and clear and settled. And if you find a way to connect with that, you can survive and even thrive through the difficult times that drive your mind crazy about, I don't have any control over this, I don't know what's going to happen next, all of the stuff that we catastrophize about and fear. So meditation has been mine, you know, to a certain extent it was Gandhi's as well, although Gandhi's big practice was chanting. So
Gandhi, he was a big chanter. Correct.
He was a big chanter. He chanted the name of Ram, the name of God. And of course, when he was shot, that's what happened. He was shot, he was assassinated. And for the next minute that he lived, he chanted the name of Ram. That was deeply in him, and that was his kind of center.
Right. I think we need to educate people on how to do it, you know, to meditate and to find that centered place, because you know, so many people are resorting to taking, you know, anti-anxiety pills and you know, artificial means to kind of deal with their pain. I think finding our own tools and our techniques to manage our emotions is just, I think it's really essential for at this point in time. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Celine. for me, again, if I look back on the trajectory of my spiritual life, the discovery of meditation in my 20s, when I was 25, was absolutely pivotal. It opened the door to everything that followed.
Mm.
And, I so encourage people to learn meditation and stick with it, because contrary to a lot of what you might hear in the popular press, it's not easy at the beginning to meditate.
Yeah.
It's not. You have to
Yeah, I've
learn.
tried.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard, and
it's hard.
most
Yeah.
of us most of us give up. Even my friends who are really dedicated to meditation, I've found that having a group, having what I call a meditation buddy, my friend Diane
Hmm.
and I meditate together 3 times a week, some structure that allows you to keep coming back again and again to your cushion, um, and and after a while. And the studies show that even 10 minutes a day, 7 minutes a day, actually, if it's done regularly over time, begins to change your brain so that you begin to act less out of the limbic system, less out of the so-called neo-mammalian brain, and more out of the prefrontal cortex, more out of the part of the brain that does have perspective and compassion, um, and that fosters this sense of profound well-being. So that's just my little pitch, to join with your voice and saying, yeah, guys, learn to meditate. Make time for it. Yeah.
So meditation worked for you. Are there any other ways that you recommend for people who might
Yeah,
want to, want to try different things?
absolutely. There's so many ways to meditate. So we talked about Gandhi and chanting.
Yeah.
Chanting is a great way to focus the mind. Meditation is nothing other than attentional training. Meditation
Yeah.
is simply training the mind to land on an object and come back again and again.
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness is, of course, a kind of a moderately new word. Mindfulness
Yes.
expands that attention so that one is not only aiming, narrowing, and focusing, which is concentration meditation, but is widening the scope so that rather than a laser of meditation, you have a little bit of a searchlight that's capable of seeing and being present for sensation, feelings, thoughts, and finding a way to live at the center of that and not be blown away by it. So mindfulness is a great doorway into meditation, yes.
You say that our dharma is very much connected to, altruistic motives and kind of doing good in the world. You write that personal fulfillment and the common good must arise together, or they will not rise at all. So,
Yeah.
could you please explain what you mean by that and how it applies to our dharma?
This is such an interesting facet of the Bhagavad Gita. When you really examine the Gita, it's a brilliant 2,000-year-old scripture, you discover that Krishna, who is actually an avatar of God, constantly says, when you find your dharma, you'll find that you work always for the welfare of all beings. And what that points us to in our era is that we live in an era of profound narcissism.
Yes.
Narcissism is the experience of being completely obsessed with I, me, mine, my brilliant writing, my great career, all of that stuff. And actually what Krishna teaches is that the obsession with I, me, and mine takes you away from your dharma. Because dharma, fully enacted dharma, it doesn't matter what it is. If your dharma is stamp collecting, eventually, if you're doing it full out, it will bring you to a way in which to support the well-being of the whole, because we're so interconnected. And this is another myth about the self in our current day, is that we are these little engines of consciousness under our own power. But the truth of our interconnection which we've seen, for example, during COVID, how interconnected the whole world is now. And we can't just take care of ourselves here in the United States. We have to be proactive in helping to help the entire world become vaccinated or have masks or whatever we need, because we're interconnected. It's the truth of human beings. You know, in the contemplative traditions, there are the so-called 3 marks of existence. One is anicca, which means impermanence, which is the fact that everything changes all the time. The second is anatta, which is usually defined as no self, but it really means no self under its own independent power. In other words, we are co-creations of our relational field, of our world. And our Dharma inevitably brings us back to that. So the third mark of existence, of course, is dukkha, or suffering. And that's the notion that whenever we act based on grasping, again, grasping for I, me, or mine, aversion, hatred, and delusion, we create suffering for ourselves and for all beings. Likewise, when we act on compassion, loving kindness, generosity, we create well-being for ourselves and for all beings connected. So there aren't that many scriptures that point this out with such ferocity as Krishna does in the Bhagavad Gita. And especially since I was dealing with, in this book, with difficult times, in those difficult times, we are forced into an acknowledgement of how interconnected we are. Mm-hmm. Right? So Harriet Beecher Stowe, when she lost her son, was forced to feel the depth of loss and realize other people feel this too. All those Black women across the river in Kentucky whose children are being ripped away from them are having the same experience I am. It's a human experience. And so compassion arises. And with compassion arises what they call in the yoga scriptures, the samapatti, or coalescence, or the acknowledgement that in every way that really counts, you and I, everybody watching, is made of the same stuff. We're human beings. We're made of the same stuff. We recognize that stuff in another. So I took the opportunity to bring forward that teaching of Krishna. Yeah. Personal fulfillment can only arise in the context of the well-being of the whole. Yeah. The United States can't just solve the COVID problem ourselves. It has to be in the context of the whole world.
I think the way our society, the way it is, it's not conducive to creating this culture where people do feel that sense of responsibility and compassion. So what do you think we could start doing to change that?
I mean, I think we each have to do what we can in our own little world. Mm-hmm. You know, I tell the story in the book of Indra's Web, which is a great teaching story that goes all the way back to Vedic times, where Indra, the great god of the Vedic dispensation, lived on Mount Meru in India. And it was said that he cast a vast net over the entire universe. And at the warp and woof strand of each vertex was a gem. And it's that gem's job to hold together that part of the net. That's the only job you have, is to hold together your part of the net, mm-hmm. which means you're not responsible for the whole thing. You're responsible for your part. And so when I was forced to ask myself, what can I do? Well, I'm a writer. I can write. That's what I do. Yes. So write about this in a way that will help move people toward the compassion of a Gandhi, the understanding of interdependence of a Martin Luther King. Yeah. And you run a podcast. You can do that through your podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I love that. So you're saying you could find a way to do it by following your Dharma, like the way of Marianne Anderson. I think it was through her singing that she was able to open people up through using her gift.
No, that's exactly right, Sunny. And that's just the right character in my book to point to.
Yes.
Marian Anderson was confronted with this. Of course, she was one of the greatest contraltos the world has ever seen.
Yeah,
She was,
yeah.
she was
I listened
yeah,
to her and I was like, whoa. I listened to
amazing.
her before and I was like, that
And,
voice, it's
and,
out
and
of
of
the
course,
world.
she's a Black woman, and she was singing in the 20s and 30s. And she was renowned in Europe, all the great halls of Europe. She had
Yeah.
dominated. And then she came back to this country, and because she was Black, she was not allowed to sing in any of these places
Can't
that
even
would
imagine. My
not
goodness.
allowed to sing in
Yeah.
Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., the greatest hall in the capital of our land. And in her book, she describes, she says, well, I wasn't made for hand-to-hand combat. I'm not an activist. So what do I do? Well, she decided to use her gift. Just like I'm saying, I write, you run a podcast, all these people watching us do something, use your gift. That's what Marian Anderson did. And so she wasn't allowed to sing in Constitution Hall, but Eleanor Roosevelt got seriously pissed about this situation. And she resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution, who owned the hall. She and her husband created this amazing event where Marian sang in front of 75,000 people in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And it was one of those crossroads events, because here's this majestic Black woman standing in front of a row of microphones going around all around the world, singing African-American spirituals, singing the American, singing My Country 'Tis of Thee, the American anthem, and a bunch of fabulous European repertoire. It was the kind of event that changed people's minds. And later she realized it was through her use of the gift that she was able to do that. So she began to bring her gift to where it was needed in the problem of racism in America. She brought it, and she didn't have to become a fighter. I'm not a fighter myself. I'm not particularly an activist, but I
Yeah.
have a responsibility to, as an author, to speak to what's happening in the times. So that's why I made the choices I did in this book, and I feel great about it. I love the process of getting to know these characters.
Me too. Me too. It was, I wasn't expecting to learn about so many new people. Sojourner
Yeah.
Truth was another, she
Oh,
really struck me as being fascinating. I had no idea someone like her
no,
existed.
most people don't. These are people in the book who tend to live on pedestals, like Sojourner Truth.
Yeah.
There's a statue of her in Boston and so forth. But
Yeah.
when you realize what this woman went through and what she offered to the world,
Yeah. And her audacity.
her audacity, she was just so courageous. She already lost everything by the time she was 26.
Yes.
Parents, family, everything. And she had nothing more to lose. And she heard the voice of God, the Holy Spirit, who said, okay, now you're going to be my prophet, and you're going to go from town to town, and you're going to talk about your experience of slavery. You're going to talk about what it was like to be enslaved and what it's like to be free. And you're going to show your body with all of the marks of the lash. You're going to show your finger that got cut off in slavery. And so God gave her the name Sojourner Truth, because she was to sojourn, which means to travel, and she was to talk about truth. And she was so feisty.
Feisty, I know. Yeah, they should do a movie about her life. I don't know why they haven't done that yet.
I'm sure they will do before too long. I believe they have done a movie of Harriet Tubman, who was her counterpart, another self-emancipated slave woman who became a force of nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I fell in love with these characters, and my goal was to bring them off the pedestal and make them real for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you did such a great job of that, Stephen. I mean, thank you so much for writing this amazing book, which I'm sure that a lot of people will connect with and really speak, it'll really speak to a lot of people. I'm so sure about that.
That's lovely to hear. Thank you, Celine.
Yeah, Stephen, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to talk with you, and good luck with your Dharma. I mean, you're obviously doing great work in the world. So
thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to quickly let our listeners know that Stephen Cope's new book, Dharma in Difficult Times, is available everywhere where books are sold and at his website, stephencope.com.
That's great. Thanks so much, Celine.
Thank you, Stephen. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Bye for now.
Bye.